There's the clap.
All right, Ethan. Welcome to the engine room. Your
Thanks.
first appearance so far. You know what we're talking about today?
What are we talking about today?
We are talking about account-based marketing
Ooh.
and why it's becoming a bit of a buzz in the marketing world. So to start us off, we're going right into the nitty-gritty of what is it actually. So if you were to describe account-based marketing in simple terms for the listeners, what would you say it is?
So account-based marketing is a unified sales and marketing effort to essentially define some target accounts that fit your ICP based on your historical close win, or maybe for strategic reasons, you want to enter a new vertical or a new market, that you are simultaneously pummeling with all sorts of information about your product or your service in tandem, again, with marketing and sales together to get more pipeline and more revenue at the end of the day through this very select group of accounts.
All right. Do you think there's any particular reason why it's gaining so much buzz as like a go-to strategy, especially within B2B SaaS these days?
I think there's a few reasons for that. One is really comes down to finance, and essentially this grow at all costs path is pretty much sailed its course. So essentially, instead of just a spray and pray, let's go after all the accounts that we possibly can, people are realizing there's only a handful that are actually fit the criteria for what we want and what has actually closed for us successfully in the past. So it's really about focusing the efforts on getting these accounts to win. On the flip side as well, oftentimes products or services don't necessarily just have one offering that they provide. So in terms of expansion or upselling, it's about building upon what you already have. I think there's an old marketing trope about and sales trope about it's more expensive to get a new customer than to keep a current one. Well, I think that sort of applies in the sense of it's going to be cheaper to expand upon an existing relationship with the customer as you have it.
Yeah. So when a lot of these businesses out there, especially, some of them were consulting, right? They maybe want to get their hands on account-based marketing for 2025. How can businesses sort of assess whether it's the right approach for their market and for their goals?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is that to look at is ACV to start off with. Account-based marketing is a little bit more of a cost-intensive focus. Again, you're getting rid of the spray and pray approach in most cases. But the question is do the unit economics add up to the point where you can win new business, right? So that's definitely one of the key things. I think another question is how close are your marketing and sales teams? One of the common flaws that I see is that companies will say, hey, we're doing account-based marketing. Well, what are you actually doing? And what they're actually doing is they've defined the target account list, they've put that up on LinkedIn and said, we only are sending ads to this company, and that's our ABM strategy. ABM involves the sales team, whether it's doing outbound messaging through phone calls, being present at the events that they know their potential partners are going to be at, organizing get-togethers, talks, seminars, whatever it is, sending physical merchandise or gifts. That's what it takes to do ABM properly. Unfortunately, it's mostly just the target account list uploaded. We're doing ABM, and sales might oftentimes just be working its entirely different account list because they think, there's a cheap, easy win here. let's go after that instead.
Yeah.
So that alignment, I think, along with ACV values being high enough are
Yeah.
two of the important factors.
And for the listeners out there who may not know what ACV stands for?
Average customer value.
All right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few interesting things here. One of them is the relationship with sales, right? Most of the clients that we help, they're marketing people, right? Rarely they may be salespeople. And I think it's mostly marketing people who try and bridge that gap with sales, and it's very rarely that it's the other way around, right? So what I'm keen to hear your thoughts on are when businesses are taking the first steps, and when we say businesses, then I'm mainly speaking about marketing teams, right? About starting account-based marketing. What are like the critical first steps to take before diving into account-based marketing, right? And how important is it to facilitate that relationship with sales as one of those first steps, if you believe that?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important to facilitate those first steps or those connections like early on. Sort of show them, hey, this is what we want to do, and I think an important aspect of that is actually looking into the data, right? Going into your CRM, figuring out, okay, these are the accounts that have come in. Here's the ones where we've seen like a lot of high close rates, high ACVs. Get them excited about the idea that working in a more tailored approach is going to ultimately help them get those fatter commission checks at the end of the day, as opposed to the spray and pray of like, maybe this guy will respond. Oh, okay, well then I'm just going to spend the next 3 months following up on this lead that we took a phone call once and then he ghosted me, right? Actually shift the dynamics so that the leads that come in, whether they come in directly or whether you're doing sort of a lukewarm outreach, are well aware of your product or service and like the benefits that they can drive out of adopting you.
Yeah. So what about something like expectations, right? So I'd imagine that, and having been there myself previously, managing expectations, if you're usually running like a lead gen motion, right? You're collecting leads, sending it over to sales. They may already be pissed off at you for sending low quality leads. That's one sort of avenue to go down. But then also, you may not get an abundance of leads anymore, right? Because now you're working in a different sort of arena. So do you have any like advice for people potentially thinking about account-based marketing when it comes to managing expectations?
I mean, I think one of the easy things to showcase is just again coming back down to that data question. If you have a clean CRM and can actually showcase like specifically, all right, we sent you this many leads. You probably spent on average 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours a month working on these, and for what, right? And you need to sort of showcase the ability of what marketing can do to make their job easier. So I think that's one of the big things. Having a bunch of SDRs just running off and cold calling and writing cold emails or using LinkedIn Sales Navigator just to bring in as many leads as they can as well doesn't necessarily work super well when it comes down to the unit economics of it. Because not only are they spending all their time chasing these things that may or may not come through, but if they do create an op, they're also bringing in the account executives and a lot of their time as well. And again, if you're pretty much having to explain what it is you do and what benefits you have from scratch, it's going to be a much harder uphill battle than it would be if you were to, sort of work in tandem with the marketing team that's generating awareness, hype, and presenting clear value to the prospects before they actually start speaking.
Yeah. So I guess the importance there is that if marketing tries to run off and do this on their own accord, it's not really going to have the same effect, right? I think that's an obvious conclusion, but it might also better their relationship with sales working in accordance and sharing the same overall growth metrics, right? So in order to be able to chase these accounts, you gotta have an ICP, right? And in order to have an ICP, you gotta understand how do you get there in the first place. So let's talk setting up the motion. How do you define your ICP and then the target accounts? But let's start with the ICP.
I mean, I think the ICP really comes down to, again, looking at historical, like, closed won revenue analysis. Who has come in recently over the past year, maybe 2 years, and won? What firmographic details do they have with one another? Is it like use case driven? Is it industry? Is it region? What exactly is it that sort of ties these together? Employee size, another big question, right? A lot of people try going after enterprise clients because of the fact that they see larger ACVs. That's great if you have the team and resources to handle your enterprise. So you not only need to look at like the closed one, but also essentially like how long they're sticking with you. But essentially, you need to sit down and run some of this analysis. And this can't be done just as a one-off. Your ICP will change over time. Business interests change, use cases, needs. I mean, we're in a world of Gen AI now. Who the hell knows how that's going to influence, how business decisions are made, what tasks need to be done, and the like. So there's definitely going to be changes to that as well, and other technologies, other problems that arise in the business world that you might be able to fix in another way.
Absolutely. Do you reckon you need any sort of tools to do? I mean, the ICP, you can mainly do that on your own, right? Mapping it out, doing obviously CRM.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think like hopefully you have some sort of data enrichment already. I know that like if you need to plug things in, Cognism is a short little trip away. But I think it's mostly just looking at math. Again, it's a question of where deals are coming in. What are close rates? That's another important thing across these, and then doing in-depth research on whether that's listening to the gong calls or anything of that sort to really figure out, okay, what was it that drove them to you? How did they get to yes? And identify those like core value props or use cases where these things are connected.
Yeah. And the next one on the list then, once you've defined your ICP based on your historical data, right? Next up is target accounts. Now, what may happen is that a wish list is created. So what's your take on that? How do you actually build out your target account list? What sort of tool would you use? And how do you avoid the wish list trap, if you should at all avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. If the wish list aligns with your ICP, then generally speaking, I think that's fine. And should be, great. The wish list is there.
It's on point.
Yeah. I think from a wish list persona, otherwise, if you have a list of like 500 accounts and you haven't really serviced any sort of client or enterprise in that basis, then it probably makes more sense to explore, a more direct one-to-one or one-to-few approach, where you're just focusing in on a few accounts, trying to get under the idea of like, hey, what is it that they actually care about? What are they posting on LinkedIn? If you meet them at a conference, what is it that they're saying or doing that makes you think that what they might be interested in resolving this sort of task? But I would a wish list can be used on a smaller scale, perhaps for more intensive stuff. But if you're trying to line that up with like a broader ABM motion, and there's just going to be disconnect. So my focus would be really to build on the existing ICP list for either a one to few or one to many approach.
Yeah. Would you also then use something like Cognism to find the
Yes, you did ask about tools. Yes, Cognism is a great tool to help if there's certain firmographic data that you need, whether that's industry, employee size.
Yeah.
Say they're using, you need to make sure that they're using Office 365. Well, Cognism has a lot of that sort of information embedded, though, of course, Office 365 might be a bad example. Most firms these days are using some form of version of that, but it's something to factor in. So Cognism's great. Beyond that, there's also the potential research that you can do of. There have been times where I've gone through like actual. Company financial statements and been like, okay, well, like their C-suite clearly viewed this as a priority. Like how do we tie this in for this year?
Yep.
How do we help alleviate their problems, right? So there's also going to be like a research component that comes with Cognism. Is a great start, but then how do you narrow that down further? And that's a big question.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things you sort of described there was, there's one-to-one, there's one-to-few, and there's one-to-many, the most 3 used cases, right?
Yeah.
So if we were to then talk about like diving into, most people are going to use LinkedIn, right? So let's take LinkedIn as an example. What's the setup then actually looking like? The transparent way of setting that up, how you would typically go about it.
Between for one-to-one or one-to-few or one-to-many or like
it could be let's do one-to-few, and let's say we have like 50 accounts in there.
Yeah. Okay, so again, like I think one of the big things is comes down to first you gotta get the list into LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
But depending on the audience size that you have to work with, it then sort of dictates to what extent you can utilize a funnel system to sort of get people top, middle, bottom. Audience size above 10,000, you'll probably be able to run with some form of a funnel system. Of course, you will need different types of content to make sure. Here's like at the top, it would be things such as explainer videos, people talking about pain points, or just single image pain point ads. Middle funnel, a lot more in-depth like product walkthroughs or customer like testimonials or the like. Maybe some webinar like invitations, webinar snippets, a mix of those two things, and then at the bottom it's just direct calls to action through single image ads, through message or conversation ads as well. LinkedIn has that capability, which is a pretty cool one. But that's of course if you have that audience size. If you don't, which is going to become much more likely the smaller your audience is, to actually tier out the various funnels, then you have this challenge of like, how can I make sure that people are sort of seeing the content that need to see it, and that's going to probably just revolve. We can probably cut out a lot of the middle funnel, because as time moves on, you want to make sure that people you don't want to be gating your content. We talk about the downside of gating white papers or ebooks all the time, but you're similarly going to be gating content to a certain respect if there's just not enough people, because you're not going to be showing them what's important. So just a healthy creative mix that is ever changing, because how many times can someone see the same single image ad before they're just like, enough. I get it, but like I'm still not buying from you.
Yeah, that's very valid. And as a general rule, we have like, at least I have that rule, right? Where in a 30-day period, you don't want to like exceed a frequency of like 7. That's typically a good number. But you don't want to be too low either, right? Because if you're just hitting like a frequency of 2 in a 30-day period, people are not going to remember it. Another thing that is interesting is in one of our internal cases, right? Going back to like the firmographics, where the list is comprised of, it's obviously an ABM approach, right? The list is comprised of accounts that already have a solution And I think that goes back to what sort of messaging should you go to market with, right? We can't just go out there and say, go after like what we would deem as being the normal pain points, because we have to convince somebody to leave for another system. So that also adds a layer of complexity, right? Where you have to actually analyze your target accounts. Like you said, maybe going into financial statement, looking at what sort of key roles are they hiring for, and sort of going down that path. So it's not just you could get it up and running quickly, but to do it properly, right? How would you then go approach like the one-to-one? So let's say you're going after enterprise accounts. You have the audience size. Do you have any tips to perhaps using AI for content? Because it could become very time-consuming, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think with a sort of a more one-to-one approach, you're going to want to call out your people directly. So if you're going after I don't know, say Microsoft,
Yeah.
right? You're just going to want to say like, hey, Microsoft in your ads, make sure that they know that this is targeted for them.
Yeah.
You can bring up stuff that you've seen from some of the decision makers' LinkedIn's, or from news articles if you want. But like personalized is better in this case. By and large, I think one of the other aspects is that like your impact on like on that level of digital only is going to be a little harder to do. So you're really going to need to expand outside of the digital arena, just because if they see you on LinkedIn, that's a great touch point. We get people coming in off LinkedIn ads all the time, but like that's not everyone. So you do need to also make sure that you are following up with those private dinners or meeting with them at events, or physically gifting. I think the one-to-one approach involves like a lot more sort of offline, or it can still be online communication, but just from a very varied approach.
Yeah. And then going back to like the ACV, heavily depends on that, right? How much are you banking on potentially making in return for all that effort? Another good tip is Loom videos with just your logo and their logo. Just shoot them out, product demos, whatever, it can work wonders as well. Now, we can do all of this, but if we're not able to track anything, then we're not really able to measure success. So let's just briefly talk about critical metrics to track and how to track them.
Yep. So again, it sort of depends on the approach that you're taking, right? But the things that I would look for primarily are obviously the end result is closed won revenue. So let's work our way back from there. So closed won revenue, probably, particularly if you're doing a complex enterprise solution, you're not going to see that. Before that comes pipeline, naturally, right?
Yeah.
So where are things in the pipeline? How can you help facilitate that further? And then you can work your way down to contacts that have actually engaged, whether that's if they downloaded some sort of lead magnet, or they've been responding or in correspondence with a sales rep in some capacity. But one step before that would be looking at signals of intent. There's a lot of debate as to how effective some of those like website de-anonymizers are, but utilizing some are definitely highly recommended, because it gives you some sort of index on, okay, people are actually visiting our site, they're caring about like what we have to say, like how can we utilize that to spur the next conversation to get people into that pipeline mode. How can we facilitate that more effectively? Personally, at Sparkforce, we've utilized a tool like that before, utilizing just like high intent page views, or and we've been able to close business that way. We've also recommended it to some of our clients and have passed the the accounts that have come in on these high intent views, and that has resulted in some new pipeline generated for them as well. Not necessarily looking at like specifically, particularly as you go deeper into the one to few or one to many, like what is created specifically through a hand raiser that says, yo, I want a demo or I want to talk to sales. It's more about like how these accounts are moving throughout their entire relationship with your
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think personally, right, we use the automated Slack messages to sort of alert everybody. It's also something that I think we're generally advising people to do, because if you have them locked in a software somewhere, there's a lot of software that does that, right? So we're not going to single one out. But if you leave it there and do not actually send that like through automated means to a sales team, sort of falls, for flat ears. One of the things that we get a lot of questions about is, when do you know that it's time to scale or spend more? It's sort of a complex question and a simple one at the same time. But I'm curious about your take.
I mean, I guess it really comes down to looking at the costs and the potential revenue that's coming in with that, right? Like an ABM program is not going to give you results within 3 months if you're looking for like closed won revenue. But you're gonna probably need to let an ABM program run for a good 6 to 9 months at a minimum before you can start seeing the pipeline start to roll in. The question that you then ask is like, all right, what is the pipeline to cost ratio? Like, what is our typical close rate before we start running like these ABM motions? And just based on that, in the ideal world, your conversion rate from opportunity created to opportunity won sort of will get higher. But you need that sort of benchmark to say like, okay, is this going to be ROAS profitable for us? And if you're starting to see that traction come in, then I think it takes the next step of like, how can we start scaling this? How can we start making it work in a way that's meaningful and effective for us as a company?
Yeah. So I think some of the things you can look at as like leading indicators to spend more, if we look at it from that angle, is if in a 30-day period across your campaigns to these, let's say 50 target accounts, you're hitting like a frequency below 7, odds are you're not really spending as much as you need to for that audience, right? Maybe the CPMs are high or whatever it may be. And at that point, then it will take even longer than the 6 to 9 months to actually see results, right, on average. Whereas if you're seeing good, let's say more like, don't know if we should call them lacking indicators in this case, but if you see, the pricing page views come up, demo page views come up from these target accounts, maybe you see a few hard inbounds. And if you have some sort of initial good like pipeline to cost ratio, maybe a 10 to 1, I don't know if that's excessive, then I'd say, okay, how can we calculate whatever we have here into some sort of benchmark statistic for further scaling, right? But otherwise, I mean, I'm also hearing you that you say, do not make any assumptions or any sort of conclusions for an ABM program until after 6 to 9 months, right? So you need to be able to make that investment for that initial period in order to properly conclude whether or not this is successful, right? So what happens then if you're sitting between doing an account-based marketing approach or doing more generic demand generation? How would you sort of weigh the two? If I'm sitting in a B2B SaaS, I maybe have my ICP. Should I dedicate my money for this or that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I would sort of say that to a certain extent, and I'm stealing the title of the Terminus co-founder's book, but like B2B is ABM, ABM is B2B. Like whether you're doing a demand generation approach, like I would sort of make the argument that like any demand generation approach should be viewed as like a one-to-many approach. If you don't have any sort of targeting or segmentation in, unless you're like literally at the very start of your growth journey, then you're sort of going to be missing the mark for as many of the impressions or spend that you're putting, whether it's Google, LinkedIn, like Reddit, Facebook. You're just going to be missing that mark entirely. So I think that there has to be an element of some sort of here's what we want to be doing, and so that, like, you know, in most cases you want to be making sure that sales and marketing are aligned. Like, hey, these are the types of accounts that we want to be going after. Here's how we do it. So that's my answer, is that, like, to run a demand gen, you're pretty much doing like a programmatic or one-to-many ABM anyways, if you want to be doing it properly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So in essence, whether you want to do one thing or the other, you're going to end up with the same result, right? And I think we should actually let those be our last words. Thank you for participating, talking about ABM. And that's it.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.